and welcome all to my presentation entitled Provable Non-Frameability for 5G Lawful Interception. This is joint work with my supervisors, Mikael Asplund from Linköping University and Marinho Barcellos from the University of Waikato in New Zealand. So since the early deployment of mobile networks in the 80s, where only analog audio transmission was supported, we've seen tremendous development in the recent mobile network generations. So in 5G, for example, we now are able to get high throughput and low latency, which enables a range of new applications. These applications include cyber-physical systems, such as cooperative driving scenarios, e-health or other health scenarios. People are talking about remote surgeries, and augmented reality, amongst other applications. So all this new ecosystem involves rich data about its users. And somehow our real and digital identities get blended somehow as we use many of these applications on our day-to-day activities. Given such rich data, it's no surprise that states around the world want to use such information for, well, supposedly or under the motivation of serious crimes investigations and anti-terrorism. So countries around the world have established legal frameworks to conduct such lawful interception activities. Because it's a widely required compliance with such lawful interception, 3GPP has released technical specifications, and these specifications, as with other specifications, are standardized around the world by standardization bodies. In Europe, for example, this is done by the European Telecommunications Standards Institute, or ETSI for short. So in the UK, these activities are overseen by the Investigatory Powers Commissioner's Office, who releases every year a report with some statistics and some concerns and overall activity of such lawful interception. So this comprises around 600 public authorities, law enforcement agencies, and to give you just a broad picture, this last report, which was released in March this year, about 2021, they released the information that around 300,000 warrants and authorizations were applied in the UK in 2021. Out of these, around 3,600 involve live data, so which means the target picks up the phone, connects to the network, immediately the law enforcement agency starts receiving data about the target and the communication data. So it's not surprisingly, there's a lot of debate, as mentioned in the keynote, about what's a privacy versus national security. We're not going to go too much into this discussion. But there's been recent proposals in academia, such as openable encryption, where authorities would hold the keys to open such end-to-end encrypted communication in case needed for investigation of crimes or terrorism. So our position, we go in a different perspective. We think that weakening security in favor of LI is counterproductive, and security is needed for many financial, economic activities, and also due to privacy concerns. So we take a different perspective here. In recent years, due to this increase in the activities involving mobile networks, there's been an increase in attack interest as well. So these are some screenshots I took from a hacker group who were advertising recruitment of employees in large companies involving telecommunications as well. And a few weeks later, they announced they had hacked a large Latin American telecommunications company. And basically what they were requesting was not data or anything. They just requested an internal point of connection, like a VPN, so they could circumvent the perimeter where most protections would be applied, and they could get pivoting to internal systems more easily, because it's more easily to exploit from the internal compared to the external network. This has also been published in mainstream media, so it's likely true. There's been other news as well involving the light basing group that has been found to compromise many telecommunications companies around the world. Last year, there's been security advisory by the US government regarding network exploitation as well. And this is a bit older, where many SIM cards have been, or the symmetric keys used for authenticating users and mobile networks have been leaked. I think this was 2015, so a bit older now. And of course, this raises concerns about the security in lawful interception. And surprisingly, it seems to be overlooked in research. So we decided it should be, well, interesting to look at. From the technical specifications point of view, they leave many security aspects out of scope, as with other security specifications. So it's unclear sometimes what the security mechanisms are to protect this lawful interception interfaces. And with, as we've seen, with these increasing attacks to operators, it becomes essential to also assess potential impact involving lawful interception. So among all concerns, what we decided to look at is whether lawful interception could be abused in some way to frame honest users. And if so, how could we mitigate it and gain some confidence in our solution, in our design? So just to be clear up front, we're targeting design analysis. We're looking at specifications. We're not looking at the actual operators, how they handle it, how the implementation works. So just to be clear up front. And so let's go into a little bit of background. We've seen some background about 5G already, so I'll not get stuck too much here. This is a simplified view. We have typically a user equipment that connects through a base station over the air, and we have several internal components or network functions responsible for authentication and key agreements and other services provided by operators. So there's the UPF for packet routing, acts as a gateway. And with respect to LI, we have the mediation and delivery function which aggregates data from these network functions, which contain points of intercept, which basically, in case there is a target connecting, it starts forwarding data to the MDF, which subsequently goes to the law enforcement agencies. To establish communication in 5G, it's heavily based, or most of authentication is based on AKA, or 5G AKA now, which is based on symmetric key pre-shared between, well, usually a SIM card, or can be provisioned over the air, over remote provisioning as well. And a series of intermediate keys are derived through authentication and key agreement and subsequent protocols in the registration. So the main point here is that these arrows, they denote key derivation functions, and basically knowing the upper levels allow an attacker or whoever to derive the lower keys, which are used for the session communication. To analyze the security of protocols, we typically have two approaches. In the computational model typically used by cryptographers, we are dealing with bit strings and probabilities, and we typically want to show that there's negligible probability that the attacker achieves some goal that compromises the security. And the other approach is the symbolic model, which basically abstracts the bit strings as terms, and we capture properties of crypto primitives as an equational theory. So it's more amenable to automation, and we can apply some logical reasoning for analyzing the security of protocols. So we choose the tool Tamarin, which is a state-of-the-art tool, and it's been shown to work with many complex protocols. It's been used for analyzing 5G AKA, TLS 1.3, and other complex protocols. So let's go into the threat model and talk about what would be the susceptibility to frameability. We consider a very strong attacker, as we could see, an internal attacker from the motivation. So we divide the capabilities regarding compromise of communication channels and compromising keys. And with respect to channels, we assume the attacker might get either read-only or so-called do-levial, which allows an attacker to manipulate the traffic, decompose and compose new messages based on the information it has gained over the communication. We also, to analyze the security of our solution, we also allow certain keys to be revealed. So we give these keys to the attacker, and we see how if our security goals are still maintained. So first, to talk about susceptibility, we analyze with respect to the weakest attacker, which would be obtaining read-only access to the traffic in the network functions used for authentication, and we find that, well, session keys can be compromised even with read-only access, which means that an attacker who's able to get that level of access, or through bribing a mobile network operator administrator, for example, to derive the session keys used to impersonate a certain user and engage in criminal activity, which could induce law enforcement agencies to investigate such honest user, or if there is an ongoing investigation, one could forge evidence against a certain user. So that's our motivation to design a solution and to formally verify it. So the idea is that the users should not rely on operators' due diligence in keeping their own infrastructure secure. So we are trying to design a solution that would still be resilient to the operator being compromised. The solution consists in three main components. We have we introduce a set of protocol. We introduce a series of, we try to keep it as little as possible, the design changes to the existing 5G protocols. And we also introduce dispute resolution in some cases that are needed where a very strong attacker has compromised the whole infrastructure, including private keys of the operator. So that we basically enable users to show that the operator has been compromised through the dispute resolution when it's needed. Now, to give a very simplified view of the solution, you can find the details on the paper, and we also provide our models, the Tamarin models, if you want to check, extend it, and so on. So basically, we have the user equipment and the operator. The operator, you can think of the core infrastructure, which is only denoted by a base station, but you can think of all the core functions in the operator. So first, the user instantiates or generates new pair of keys. And there's an interaction with the operator to create a setup which generates what we call a binding. A binding symbolizes that the operator now accepts that the identity is bound to the public key that the user has generated, for which the private key is only known to the user himself or herself. This is also important later for dispute resolution, is the mechanism we use for resolving such disputes. Now, there's a series of interactions for authentication and key agreement. There's a secure mode commands for deriving session keys and so on, PDU session establishment, until a network session is available for the user to transmit data. And throughout all these protocols, we make small changes to instantiate what we call the non-frameability security context. So now when the user is able to communicate, and in case there is an interception ongoing, what the operator would do is to forward data, and here we have just an example of a law enforcement agency, forward data alongside with the binding and the non-frameability security context, for which the LEA is able to check. And in case everything is authentic according to the operator side, and an investigation goes on, the user is able to dispute the captured traffic by providing its own binding. And in case there is a divergence, because we expect or we define that the operator should only provide one binding for a certain identity. If there are distinct bindings, that's how we resolve the dispute. So we considerably extend the model by Kremers and Daniele, published at NDS 19. We update, well, they provide a model for AKA. We first update the AKA with the latest version from the 3GPP specifications, and we extend with the other protocols we need for the analysis of the solution by also including more components from the core network. We specify the non-frameability property, which resembles much the non-repudiation of origin in protocol security, but because of the connotation of the words, we rather use non-frameability, but it's very similar, and we add also dispute resolution to that. We've used the Swedish National Supercomputer Center. This took around 6,000 CPU core hours throughout development. If you've used Tamarin, you know in complex cases, it usually runs into non-termination, so we need to go into interactive mode, tune the heuristics, and so on. So that's why a lot of hours have been used. But now, in a few hours, you can just check the resulting model. And I'll quickly go through results. I'll focus on the first line and the sixth. So in the first column, you can see which keys we allow the attacker to obtain. And in the subsequent columns, you can see what are the communication channels and what is the level of compromise of the channel we allow the attacker to obtain. So in the first row, for example, we allow the attacker to obtain the symmetric key and the permanent identity. That's what the RK represents, and dual-level access on all these channels, and we can mitigate the frameability at runtime, meaning the law enforcement agency will reject automatically without a dispute. And in the sixth row, or the sixth scenario, we allow both symmetric key, permanent identity, and the private key of the operator, alongside with complete control over the channels, and in that case, we need a dispute resolution. So to conclude, we believe that internal attacks may be inevitable, and although many important research has been done in the over-the-air interface, we think that also making the internal network more resilient is very important and an orthogonal research objective. We also think that for the research to achieve technical mechanisms may support the justice system because there are lots of open challenges. How do you guarantee the chain of custody, the authenticity? How do you guarantee that targets of interception are notified eventually, and all these problems. So as future directions, we understand as the solution is designed today, there might be a lot of overhead, so we expect this to be integrated with an efficient stream signing protocol, so that you don't need to sign every single packet, but a summary of traffic, for example, every certain amount of traffic. There needs to be a secure binding. So in the model now, we treat the identity as the permanent identity provided by the network. But of course, we have this problem of binding the real identity of the user with the technical identity used to identify you on the network. So this is an open problem. And also extending the security context to other protocols such as handover and location services. So I conclude, and thank you for your attention. I'm open for questions.
Hi, thank you for your talk. I wanted to ask, from what I understand about telecommunication in the EU, there's some level of data sharing within countries within the EU, but how you're talking about sharing that user data between, and how do you authenticate different users? Is there any kind of plans in the future? Do you see the trend of the legal aspect of trading data with the countries outside of the EU? Do you see any kind of different security concerns with that? With sharing that user data between, like, say, United States and EU, or you see it being more restrictive or less restrictive in the future?
That's a good question. It's hard to say. I know many regulations, and including in 3GPP specifications, they assume there is no leakage of data across authorities. So even within the same country, they assume that one LEA intercepting a target shouldn't be, that the fact that an LEA is targeting someone should not be visible to even another LEA in the same country. So even across borders, that become even harder. So I wouldn't be able to tell how that's going to be handled.
Thank you.
Yes, there is another question.
So for the formal verification or the model checking that you presented, was that something that you did essentially out of kind of to strengthen the paper, for example, or convince yourself, or was that something that the police would then also appreciate these kind of arguments on?
If the police would appreciate?
Yeah, I mean, the verification that you did, did anyone else outside of academia care about this simplified, or this is more like an academic?
Well, it's hard to say that even industry cares about formal verification, but I think in this case it strengthens the trust of the population. So I think that will be a good argument that you say we have a mechanism which is formally verified. Of course, this is design level verification. There's all other sorts of implementation level verification and so on.
No, I don't misunderstand me. I really like this, and I find this is great and so on. It's just I'm wondering to which degree this can also be conveyed to the general population or the police and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it could be conveyed in the sense of more trustworthy mechanisms. Yeah.
Last question.
Okay, thank you for your talk. So, okay. It is clear that if you do this key at the beginning, then you can solve all sorts of issues, including this one. Did you think of any other way of doing this that wouldn't have involved public key crypto with maybe a third party and so forth differently to what you did? And if so, why did you choose this one?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I've investigated a few options, but the resorting to the third party is something I wanted to avoid. So even if we think about certificate authorities or using asymmetric crypto in the context of telecommunications, who would host the CA? Maybe it would be hosted within the operator itself. So if we assume an attacker can get in the operator, then it falls within the same threat model, I believe. So we wanted to get away as much as possible as trusted third parties. That's why I chose to develop this setup protocol, which basically allows the user to show that our expected trusted party, which is the operator, has been compromised. Yeah, but I don't think maybe using only symmetric crypto would be sufficient. I didn't go too much into that, but yeah, it's something I try to avoid relying on third parties.
Okay, thank you.
All right, so let's thank the speaker.
Thank you.